Okay. That's fine, that's all working brilliantly. So welcome everybody to this EcoSchools teacher training session on our core topic, climate action. So we changed our core topic last year for various reasons, which I'll go into in this session. So there's a few things that we're going to go through in this session, but just to get to start with, what I'd really quite like to know is what you are particularly wanting to get out of this session, because obviously I've kind of planned it around basic things you need to know for a core topic of EcoSchools, but if there's anything specific that you wanted to get out of the session, please let me know, and I'll make sure that we kind of include that and cover that as we go as well. For anybody who's just joining us, that's us just getting started. So if there is anything particularly you'd like me to include, that would be great. Okay, so we've got ideas for actions and measures. Yeah, absolutely, that's definitely something we will be covering. Brilliant as well. Thank you, Kirsten. So yeah, we will be covering just a little bit of basics of the science of climate change as well. So hopefully that's something that you can then just increase your knowledge a bit and find a bit more comfortable. Like you say, kind of guiding the eco committee as well. Ideas for activities. Yeah, definitely. I'm going to make sure I try and give you as many, not too many to overwhelm you, but lots of different ideas for activities that you can do and ways you can incorporate this into your day-to-day activities as well. There we go. So climate change actions that our committee do and easily achieve. Yeah, I think that's something that's really key as well, because climate change can feel like a really big topic you have to do. We'll talk a little bit about doing things like carbon footprinting later on, but it can feel like you have to do carbon footprinting and you have to do a big, huge thing, whereas actually it's very easy. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll feel like it's very easy to incorporate climate action into your EcoSchools work. And it's really easy thing that you can incorporate into day-to-day activities as well, that doesn't take up a lot of your time. So hopefully you'll find that. Oh, thank you, Stephanie, for giving me your name and your school. That's brilliant. Thank you. And also inspiration for next steps in our school. So that's brilliant. So thank you very much for sharing those. I say hopefully that's something I should be covering all of those as well. Oh, that's sorry, I just noticed the next one come in. That's very interesting. So links with a school in Nepal. To be able to tie in activities. That's really, really nice. It's something actually, if anybody is interested in twinning, we are trying to expand our twinning program this year. So just if there happens to be any schools that are interested in twinning, I'll give you my email address at the end of the session. So if you do want to get in touch about twinning with EcoSchools in other countries, please let me know. But I say keep an eye on the end and I'll give you my email address at the end. But thank you for sharing that. Like I say, we'll definitely be incorporating lots of different activities and ideas and things that you can do for this topic. So things that we're going to cover today. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of climate change. Some of you might be very familiar and comfortable with the science of climate change, but I know it can feel quite a daunting thing if it's not something you've taught before. So it's good just to have that basic understanding of accurately what is actually going on. Then we're going to talk about what we can do about climate change. So partly in general terms to kind of inspire general thinking and kind of inspire eco committees to think up their own ideas of what they can do, but also in kind of something more specifics and what we can offer you in terms of additional help and training for tackling climate action as a topic, and other resources and things as well that we have. And then we'll finish up doing a bit of climate action in practice, where we'll go through a bit of action planning. So obviously, eco committees, we really want pupils to be leading the work, but we understand that you guys need to help as well as terms of eco coordinators with supporting that. So we'll go through a bit of writing an action plan for the climate action topic and some ideas as to how you can actually incorporate it into your action plans as well. So I'm going to ask you this question because actually this is a really nice question that you can ask your pupils to get started and to actually see where they are in their understanding and also kind of feelings with regard to climate change. So can you tell me what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of climate change? So when you hear the phrase climate change, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What are the first thoughts or things that come into your head? And just feel free to share them. Because I say this can be a really quite nice one and can be quite eye-opening for what your pupils are thinking. So let's see, we've got effects on nature, weather changing, global warming, waters rising, temperatures increasing, global warming. Brilliant, this is really great. Anyone get any other kind of things that they come? Oh, just a quick question as well. Yeah, as far as I know, it's definitely the twinning would be for nurseries as well. So if you're really interested, then do drop me an email. So sea levels rising, temperature changes. Brilliant. So yeah, so we tend to think of a lot of the, particularly temperatures rising, thinking about global warming, and thinking about some of the effects, particularly on the natural world. So sea levels rising would be one that we really know. And yeah, we've got a couple coming in as well. Current as well changes. So things that are already happening. We're already aware of patterns in our climate that are changing. And then, yeah, we've got a lot of worries with nature, but also with humans. So yeah, issues with food security, extreme weather events. So obviously there's not very much positive tends to come to mind. And you'll probably find that if you do this exercise with your pupils, just to get them started and asking what they think, it's, you know, it's a big, scary topic. It causes a lot of anxiety. And it can feel very, very negative. And we tend to try and look at climate change in terms of, you know, obviously being honest and clear that this is a massive problem and we need to do what we can to address it. But one of the key things about eco schools is a really good opportunity for pupils to be able to take action. And that's one of the best ways to actually help with kind of the anxiety around climate change, the feelings of the, you know, being worried about change that are coming, is to be able to feel like you can do something. And there's definitely something that pupils can do. So it's just quite a good place to get started with thinking about that. Oh, and yeah, thank you very much, Jenny, for sharing as well. Yeah, absolutely. So touching on the topic of climate justice there as well. So inequalities with respect to countries affected as well. So yeah, absolutely. So a lot of countries will be much more severely affected by the extreme weather events and things like sea levels rising than we in Scotland will be, particularly in terms of inequalities, in terms of how much those countries have contributed to the problem of climate change, because it's often mostly the countries that are worse affected are the ones who have contributed the least and are then also the least able to cope with kind of having the infrastructure and the money to deal with the issues that are caused by climate change. So that's a really good point as well. And another one, again, depending on the kind of age and stage of your pupils, is a really good one to kind of bring into discussions if you are talking about climate change and thinking about trying to address those inequalities by, again, taking action. So thank you very much for sharing. So just like I say, so make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the science of climate change. I'm just going to go through a very kind of brief animation to make sure that everyone kind of understands where we are and what exactly is happening. So a lot of you mentioned the term global warming. So I'll go through what global warming is and how it happens, and then just say a little bit about why we tend to use climate change now rather than the term global warming. It's not that global warming is wrong. Climate change is just a slightly better term to kind of absorb all of the effects. So we have our beautiful planet surrounded by its atmosphere, and over there we have the sun, and the sun emits lots of heat and radiation, and that radiation comes in and hits the planet. How lovely and sunny it has been with you. I'm in West Lothian. It's been a nice sunny day, so if you go stand outside, it's nice and warm. You feel the heat of the sun. We all kind of know that, but a lot of that heat is actually generally reflected off up into space. So we lose a lot of the heat that comes in from the sun. It bounces off and it leaves. It doesn't stay in the planet. So the reason that we don't have a really cold planet at night, the reason we don't just lose all of that heat, is that we have in our atmosphere a collection of gases called the greenhouse gases. And a variety of different greenhouse gases. And what they do is they hold some of that heat in. So the heat, as I say, a lot of it bounces off, goes into space, but because we have these greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, they're bouncing a lot of the heat back in and keeping our planet just a lovely toasty temperature. And it's one thing actually that's quite important to stress to pupils, is that the greenhouse effect, so this effect of these gases trapping in heat, is natural and is a really, really good thing. So if we didn't have greenhouse gases in an atmosphere and the greenhouse effect, we would look like the moon, in that we wouldn't have an atmosphere and we pretty much wouldn't have life, because we can't sustain a stable temperature. So the moon has really extremes of cold and hot, depending on whether the sun's shining or not, because it can't protect itself from the heat of the sun, but it also can't retain that heat. So it becomes really, really cold overnight. And that's just the differences are too big for life to be sustained. So it's quite a good thing to stress that actually the greenhouse effect is really good. It keeps our planet lovely and stable in terms of temperature, and it means that we can sustain all the amazing life around us. So the problem is that what is happening now, since the kind of human populations got a lot bigger and the Industrial Revolution, is that we've been releasing a lot more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Because of that, a lot of the heat that would have been lost to space is now getting trapped and being reflected. So we're holding a lot more, and it's almost like putting lots of blankets around the Earth. And that means that we're getting too hot. So we're kind of creating a thicker layer of these greenhouse gases, which is keeping the heat in. And the term for that is global warming. So the general effect of these greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere is that the planet is getting hotter. What we tend to do, though, is we talk about climate change because often the effects of that warming aren't for everything to get warmer. So obviously we know that particularly last year we had our record highest summer temperatures. We had prolonged heat in May and June this year, but we also had a really odd July. So we had the wettest July on record, and it was quite cool for July. So we're seeing a lot of different changes, and it can be quite, sometimes when we talk about global warming, there can be a bit of confusion because a lot of people might say, oh, well, but it wasn't warm this summer. We had quite a cool summer. So how is that? So global warming mustn't be a thing. So we tend to talk about climate change. So climate being long-term weather. So looking at our weather over a long period. And by talking about climate change, it encompasses all of the effects that we're seeing. So not just the warming, but also things like the extreme weather events due to the warming of our seas, which increases the amount of moisture in the air, which is why we're seeing flooding, increased things like hurricanes, typhoons, cyclones. So all of and also changes in things like heating of the oceans and melting of ice caps is also moving our kind of circulation in our oceans. So things like the Gulf Stream is potentially going to move, which could actually lead to things getting colder rather than warmer. So that's why we kind of, like I say, we tend to talk about climate change. And we can actually see, so there's some really nice graphs. Again, I'll share these slides if you do want to use any of these with your pupils. And you're kind of resources. So this it's a bit of a complicated graph, but it's quite a nice illustration. So one of the biggest contributors to this increase in greenhouse effect and climate change is carbon dioxide. So that's the gas that we're releasing the most of in terms of greenhouse gases. So that's the one that comes from burning coal, oil, and gas. So all of our kind of transportation, a lot of our energy generation, all powering factories and making things, a lot of that is carbon dioxide that's getting released. And we can see what the carbon dioxide levels over the past 800,000 years are by looking at ice cores. So they can take cores out of the ice in the Antarctic and look at the tiny little bubbles in them to see what it's been doing for the last few 100,000 years. And you can see as you kind of go along these lines that where it's been a bit higher in terms of carbon dioxide levels, it was a bit warmer, and where it's been lower, we had an ice age. So we can see the carbon dioxide levels do equate to the overall long-term temperature of the planet. And you can see about 330,000 years ago, we had the highest concentration before humans kind of came along. So it was about 300 parts per million. But if you look right to the far right of the graph, you can see that suddenly it jumps up. And the 2018 average was about 407. We're now up to about 419 parts per million this year. And you can kind of, if you track where humans get involved, most Homo sapiens appeared about 250,000 years ago, we think. And then the Industrial Revolution happened about 170, 180 years ago, started anyway. So that's when we got the kind of the big spike going up in terms of carbon dioxide. So again, if you've got pupils that are a bit older and you wanted to kind of look at the actual long-term changes and see what effects we're having, that's quite a nice graph to use. A slightly simplified graph, which again is just showing you that long-term change, because if you look the past few years, that's not climate, that's not really giving us that long-term pattern. So this is quite a nice graph. So this is a heat map that charts the average temperature every year back from 1850 to just about now. and each kind of the average is allocated a color depending on how high or low it is. So lower temperatures are given a blue color and higher temperatures are given a red color. And again, it's just a really nice clear illustration that temperatures are very much going up over time. We're seeing this long-term increase in overall global temperatures that are then leading to the problems that we're seeing with extreme weather. So just a wee summary of some of the things that is quite good to highlight if you are talking about this with pupils. Climate change is natural, so it's a completely natural thing. But human activity is causing the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and that's causing the climate to change too quickly. So it's natural for greenhouse gases to be in the atmosphere. It's natural for the climate to change over long periods of time, as we can see with that ice, the ice ages and the warm interglacial periods. But what we're doing and our releasing of greenhouse gases is causing things to change really too quickly, and that fast change is what's really damaging to weather systems and long-term climate, and then also the life that lives on the planet, including us. So again, what are the impacts? A lot of you'll be very familiar with this, but again, just for highlighting to pupils. So things that we might see, so flooding, because we've got, like I said, we've got that increased heat in our oceans, which means more water evaporating into the air, more water in clouds, more water to fall. So we're going to see flooding, potentially wildfires. Obviously, particularly, we've seen this in Scotland as well as in lots and lots of other countries. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more wildfires with everything being much more dry in areas. So we're getting high levels of rainfall and flooding in some areas, and then drought and wildfires in other places. Because again of this change in movement, so patterns of water movement and air movement, we're getting extreme weather, so more things like storms, hurricanes, etc. And it's also quite a good one to talk about the impacts on animals as well as people. And often we think about the kind of classic one is melting ice caps and the effects on polar bears, which is obviously extremely worrying in terms of populations of the species that live in those areas. It's also quite good to think about actually effects on animals that are a bit closer to home. So a classic example would be puffins, as puffins feed on sand eels. This lovely puffin has a beak full of them. But sand eels like cold water. So as the water heats up, the sand eels are moving further and further north, but puffins then don't necessarily can't move their breeding grounds fast enough to be able to keep up with that, because they tend to come back to the same places. And also, the further north you go, you eventually run out of Scotland. So there's less land for them to be able to build their burrows on and have their nests on. So again, like I say, it's quite good sometimes to actually have a think about some of the kind of wildlife impacts as well, because that can be something that's really interesting to pupils, and thinking about local ones can be quite good. So why climate action is our core topic? So we, before we had litter and waste as our core topic, and we obviously still really, really keen for schools to be tackling litter and waste. You still need to do a litter pick as part of your Green Flag Award application. So at least one litter year for your Green Flag Award application. But as we kind of really moved our focus in education really quite heavily onto climate education and climate action, which is why we became our education team is Climate Action Schools at Keep Scotland Beautiful. We really want to push climate action as being one of the key things that we're asking schools to do, being as it is one of the biggest challenges of our time. We really want to make sure that schools are focusing on it. Which might seem like it's quite a big new thing, but as you'll see, we're going to move on to have a look at some of the things you can do. Actually, a lot of what you're already doing is climate action. You just might not have thought of it in that way. So that's just a kind of a fairly brief overview of climate change. Just before we move on to thinking about what we can do, so in terms of things and activities that you can do as part of eco schools, does anybody have any questions at all? Do feel free to keep putting them in the chat at any time as well as we're going through. Yeah, can't see anybody typing, but if anybody does have any questions, like I say, please do just pop them in the chat at any point. Okay, so what can we do? So when we're thinking about things that you could do for eco schools or just in general in your schools or nurseries for climate actions, Oh, sorry, I can just see a question. Are we okay to share some of these slides with our children? Yeah, absolutely. So if you find that some of them will be useful, particularly some of the images of the graphs and things, yeah, absolutely not a problem. So let's say there's kind of three key things that we need to think about when we're thinking about taking action for climate change. So first, the very basic thing is we actually need to all understand and care about climate change. There's still a lot of misinformation out there about whether climate change is a thing or not. It definitely is. The scientific evidence is completely unequivocal. What humans releasing greenhouse gases is causing our planet to warm up and our climate to change. But there's a lot of misinformation out there about how that's happening and what effects it's having and what we can do about it as well and whether we can do anything about it. So it's really important actually as a base point that children and young people understand just what it is, how it's happening, and also that they can do something about it, to care about it and feel like it's something that they can make a difference to. So once they understand that, we then need to do two different things in terms of actually taking action. One is to reduce our emissions. So that's emitting less greenhouse gases overall, which is technically called mitigation. And also we need to protect against the effects that climate change will bring. So we're trying desperately to get our emissions lower. The kind of general movement in climate change is to try and reduce emissions, trying to get to net zero, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we know that some changes are already locked in. We know we're not going to be able to limit warming completely. We've already increased our greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. Some changes in extreme weather is going to happen. So we need to be ready for that. So that's adaptation. So adapting to the changes we know are coming. So the first thing I'm just going to mention is learning about climate change. So what we need to do to understand. So what you can do with your pupils to understand more. So learning about climate change. So obviously you can share the slides and what you've learned today, just in terms of a kind of basic description. Pupils can go and do their own research. You can ask if you've got any local experts or anyone you know to kind of come in and talk to pupils. But we also offer quite a few different resources as well. So every year, in time with the Scottish Government's Climate Action Week, we hold a week of live lessons. So all of these are going to be links that, again, when I send you the slides, you'll be able to click the links and just get direct access to the web pages for these. But this year, Climate Action Week is the 25th to 29th of September. All the sessions are recorded because I'm aware that we time it with the Scottish Government's Climate Action Week, but that does mean a few schools are on holiday on the Monday the 25th. But it's all recorded, so you can access it afterwards as well. But if you're interested, again, you can sign up and register. We have an early years session where we have a storyteller come in and tell a story, and there's activities to go with it. That's on the Tuesday. And then the Monday through to the Friday, we have sessions for upper primary to high school pupils, looking at different aspects of climate change. This year, we're particularly focusing on nature-based solutions, which is a really interesting topic. And we also, this year in particular, we have on the Wednesday, we have the Minister for Net Zero is from the Scottish Government is going to be in a high school in Edinburgh, actually answering questions from pupils. So if you have pupils that would like to put a question to the minister, you can have a look on the Climate Action Week page. So just follow the link that's on there. When you click that link, it'll take you to a page and it gives you information. So if you have pupils that would like to ask a question, you can submit a question. You can also register to attend. So we have a limited number of places for schools. Obviously, some of you, it might be a bit far to get to Edinburgh, but if you had pupils that wanted to attend, then we can have some pupils, a kind of selection of pupils from schools go and actually ask their question in person as well. So it's a really good opportunity to actually get involved in some activism and actually asking questions. So you do need to submit your questions in advance though, so do make sure you have a look. Yes, please. So yeah, teachers do need to sign up individually. So we send out the link to the sessions to whoever's registered. So yeah, you can go onto the page that this link takes you to, and then you can sign up. But once you've got the link, you can share it around the school if you want to. So it's kind of great for us to see quite how many teachers from different schools and if we've got multiple teachers from the same school registering, but you don't have to all individually register. As long as one teacher registers, you can then send the link around. That makes sense, hopefully. So in addition to, so that's Climate Action Week. Also for early years, we have a climate change social script. So this is just a really kind of short online booklet that just explains the basics about climate change to a younger audience. So it can be quite a useful tool for sharing with your pupils just to help them get started with their understanding. We also have our Climate Ready Classrooms programme, and this year it's been opened up to primary schools as well as secondary schools. So if you're in a secondary school, you can go onto the Climate Ready Classrooms page and you can contact us and you can sign up for an in-person delivery. So someone will come out to your school, usually for one full day, and deliver a workshop to pupils on how to on climate change and what they can do to take action. Our primary school session, we're running that via local authorities because we want to try and make it bespoke to local authority areas and be able to actually connect schools together as part of what we're doing. So it's online. So the Climate Ready Classrooms for primary schools is online rather than in person, and it usually takes place over one day. We've got quite a few local authorities already signed up. So if you're not sure, again, you can contact me if you're not sure if your local authority signed up, or you can also go online and register your interest, and we can use that to kind of help push some local authorities that haven't signed up yet to get it set up for your local authority as well. And if you're interested, particularly if you're in a secondary school, you can also take part in our Train the Trainer program. So we teach you how to deliver it, the Climate Ready Classroom, so you can then deliver it to as many pupils as you want to within your school. And again, like I say, if you click on that, you'll get the link to there. Also for high schools, we've just introduced a Climate Emergency SCQF Level 4 course. So pupils can actually get a qualification out of their climate education. So again, if you're interested in that, click the link, and that link specifically, because we've just started doing that one, that will just take you to an email address. So just send an email to state your interest. We haven't quite got that up on the website yet because it's brand new. So if you are in a high school and you're interested in that, you can click that link and email Josh, who is in charge of that qualification. So that's all our kind of formal training. There's lots more resources and things on our webpage as well to help you with help teaching pupils about climate change. And someone mentioned as well at the start climate justice. So it's always good to remember, and as I mentioned this already, but climate change is also an ethical and political issue, and trying to acknowledge that those who contribute at least to climate change are those who are now most vulnerable to its impacts. So again, it's a good thing, something that we cover within our Climate Ready Classrooms programme. It's something that comes up quite a lot in our live lessons as well. So it's something we try and emphasise, but it's a good thing to emphasise with your pupils as well, and to think about how you can do that, cover that. And something that we've tried to kind of think about is thinking about how we think about our planet and global citizenship. So trying to move past thinking about being consumers and thinking about being citizens, and moving past thinking about passengers and thinking about being crewmates on the planet. So again, just some concepts. It's quite a nice way to think about climate justice that we tend to think quite often. And when we think about things like net zero and targets, we're very much concentrated in our own country little silos. So actually trying to think about the overall global picture and the part we play in the global picture rather than just our local picture as well. So thinking about some things that you can do in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation in school. So particularly thinking about mitigation, so reducing our emissions. One thing that's quite a good way of describing to pupils, and might actually, again, trying to trigger them to come up with some of the ideas, is to think about trying to reduce our emissions and become net zero. So net zero, again, just to define that, doesn't mean no emissions. So net zero is what we're aiming to get to in Scotland by 2020. And that means a balance of emissions. So we're basically taking in as many emissions as we're giving out. So we're still emitting, but we're absorbing on the other side to balance these scales. So our scales are still wonky at the moment, which is why it's put like that. So we're trying to get people to think about how they can take it from this wonky scale and balance it out. So the things that we've got that are weighing us down, there we go, are transport, our food production, so industry, so that's a lot of the things that we buy and use, the stuff that needs to be made. Energy. So our energy, that's actually box, so you can see, is not that big because we've done a really good job in this country of decarbonising our energy systems. We've got lots of wind power, particularly wind power, some solar power, hydroelectric power. We need to keep doing it, and we need a lot. We're going to need more energy if we need to decarbonise things like our transport system. But it's a good news story. We have actually done a really good job of doing that, and we just need to keep working at it to make it even better. Our heating system, so a lot of people will be on gas boilers or oil boilers. Our waste systems, so basically all the stuff that we dump in the tip gives off greenhouse gases. And then this is a funny one that pops up. So I'll explain what this is. LULUCF, which is land use change and forestry. So basically, this is woodlands and peatlands, which are extremely good absorbers of carbon dioxide, and also land use change. So this is what we do with our land. So our land can be a really good carbon absorber. So things like peatlands, forests, also certain types of grasslands are really good at absorbing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. But we can also be doing things the other way. So we can be taking a woodland and chopping it down to build houses or factories, which is then contributing to more emissions. So it's changing our land use. And at the moment, we've kind of got a bit of this on either side because we are still doing things like chopping forests down, degrading our peatlands, but we're also planting trees and helping our peatlands in some other areas. So that's why this sits on the other side of the scale. So we need to kind of put the scale, which again is some nice positive actions that pupils can take. So how does this translate into actually reducing emissions and things that you can do as part of the climate action topic? So we need to shrink those boxes that were appearing on the left. So I'll just go through them one by one and think about some of the things you can do. So transport is our transport topic. So like I said, actually a lot of the things you're already doing for eco schools and you've been doing in the past are climate action. They're just sitting under a different topic. Our topics have always overlapped, but climate action is actually probably the one that overlaps the most with all of the other topics. So if you're thinking about transport, anything that encourages active travel, reducing emissions by things like taking public transport rather than using the car, anything that you do for active transport is good. Oh, sorry, I can just see. Oh, no worries at all, Kirsten. Thanks for letting me know. I'll send you the recording link tomorrow. So yes, I say anything that you're doing in terms of active transport or promoting public transport use over using cars is a good way to actually address greenhouse gas emissions. So anything you do for that counts as climate action. For food, we have our food and the environment topic. So anything that you can do to reduce food waste. Food waste is a massive contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, partly just because if you put food waste into landfill, it releases methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. And also, every time we waste food, that's especially food that could have been consumed, that's more food that we've got to buy to feed ourselves, and all that food has to go through all the processes to get to us, which accrues lots of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. So food waste and it's a really easy one to get good wins on with your pupils. Looking about things like portion sizes. I've got a school as an example in a minute that did some stuff with food waste, which I'll show you in a second. But also you can start to look at things like different emissions from different types of foods. So you probably have heard quite a lot about people switching to vegetarian or vegan diets, because particularly things like beef and red meat, so beef and lamb, have a very high high greenhouse gas emissions associated with them, particularly because these burp a lot of methane. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to go vegan, but maybe you could look at 3 days or items, trying to eat preferentially. Massive diet changes, but there are definitely things you can do that make quite a big impact with not too much change. And I say food waste is the key one with that as well. For energy, again, we have an energy topic. So anything that you're doing in school to reduce energy use, you can set up energy monitors to track whether things are getting turned off when they're not in use, lights, smart boards, turn everything off when it's not being used. Make sure that you're using energy saving things where you can. The other one is heating, so that comes into energy as well. So making sure that your buildings, I know there's not a lot you can do in terms of major fabric structure, but other things like, is it a day when the heating's on and you've got a window open, for example? Not doing things like that, trying to think about things like draft excluders. Also thinking about, so when we talked about adaptation as well, so heating and cooling actually is becoming a thing, because generally in Scotland we don't tend to think about having to cool down until recent years. We tend to mostly think about having to warm our houses up, but actually our buildings are going to need more and more cooling, and rather than thinking about air conditioning and things like that, there are nature-based solutions, things like planting trees for shade, creating shelter areas for pupils when they're outside. Those are things that you can look at in terms of doing with pupils to help with cooling as well. There's also water use as well in terms of heating and the energy that goes into heating our water. So again, thinking about heating, but also things like heating hot water and where you need hot water. So you can have a look at things like that, monitoring tap use in school and reducing water loss, particularly with hot water. So industry, so like I said, that's the stuff we buy. So that's really looking at our litter and waste topic. So particularly focusing on waste. So anything that you can do in school or nursery that is reducing the stuff we need to buy. Every new thing we buy has a footprint of greenhouse gases associated with it. So the less things that you buy in, the less emissions that you have. So can you reduce people buying new things? So can you hold swap shops, for example? So can you swap clothes, books, toys, games, anything like that you can set up, and you can even set it up if you think you can raise a bit of money. You can even set it up as a sale and raise some money to buy something to do more eco schools work with as well. So that's a really key one. So trying to reduce and reuse materials in school as much as you can. So reusing paper rather than just throwing it out after one use. Thinking about what you can recycle kind of comes at the last of reduce and reuse, but what can you recycle? So there are things in school that you're not recycling because it's much less energy to recycle things than it is to make them new. So plastic, paper, cans, all of glass, all of those things. Are you recycling in school and nursery? Can you start recycling them? Are recycling facilities available? Are they being used correctly? All of those kind of things do count towards climate action as well. Say waste, again, that comes under litter and waste. Also a bit of food waste, so thinking about what waste, again, trying to reduce the amount of waste you have, but also thinking about things like where things like food waste are going. So if you do have food waste, you'll have some no matter what you do. Where is that going? Is that going into a landfill where it's going to release things like methane? Or can you start a compost bin? Because a properly aerated compost bin produces no methane. The food breaks down aerobically and you get no methane. So can you start a compost bin for your food waste at the same time as also trying to reduce the amount of food waste you're creating? So that's the things we want to make smaller, but we can also expand, like I said, this land use change, forestry, which comes under our biodiversity and also our school grounds topic. So anything you're doing where you're planting trees, you're planting any kind of living plant, where you're creating wild areas, trying to do anything that's increasing that kind of carbon absorption. You can also take this to your local and community and also the national community and think about supporting causes that support peat bog restoration, that support increasing our forested areas. Thinking about things like, even if you're doing gardening in school, make sure that you're using peat-free compost, because peat degradation is definitely a contributor to climate change. So making sure that what you're buying is peat-free. Again, you can contact parents at home as well, have campaigns to try and do some of these things, and peat-free compost is quite a nice one to get started with as a campaign. And in terms of our also other topics, we mentioned climate justice. Global citizenship is really also at the heart of climate action. So taking action is being a good global citizen. And our health and well-being topic as well. So a lot of these activities are really good in terms of health and well-being. So reducing our cars will have a positive impact on the particulates in the air. So we will have healthier air. There's lots of getting outside and growing and planting is really good for health and well-being. And also that mental well-being, so addressing climate anxiety and taking action is really, really key. So let's say actually all of our topics are covered by climate action. So a lot of the things you will have been doing already are actually do count. So you can just count those. But hopefully that's given you a few ideas as well of things that you can do. So just to give you a couple of other examples. So I mentioned carbon footprint calculators before. So carbon footprint calculator is a measure of the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere as a result of our activity. So it's called a carbon footprint, but it includes carbon dioxide and all the other greenhouse gases. So we do have guidance notes online with a link to a carbon footprint calculator. It's quite a complex, in-depth carbon footprint calculator, but it can be quite a nice exercise actually, because sometimes I know a lot of schools and nurseries don't have access to certain information like what your energy supplier is and how, things like that. But it might be worth just actually picking some sections that you can calculate just to get the idea of where some of these emissions are coming from. Or if you do want to do a full calculator, then you can go ahead. Say it's quite an involved thing, but it can be something that you might want to do is just pick and choose which bits of it you do to just learn a bit more about your emissions. But it's not something that we're in any way is required as part of your climate action topic. There are lots of other ways to measure your impact through whether what you're through what you're doing is making a difference. Then you don't have to do a carbon footprint calculation. So here's some just specific examples of what some schools have done. So we had Lauriston Nursery, who did energy in the area. So they did quite a nice thing where they just went walking around the area looking for different types of how different types of energy were generated. So they looked for things like how many solar panels they could find, and wind turbines and things. And I think they really liked going out and seeing, what was around them. They looked for things like street lights and electricity cables. So actually just starting to have that awareness of where the energy is. Also looking at objects in the nursery, thinking what required power to work and thinking about things that maybe what things didn't. So wind up toys as opposed to electric toys, and then thinking about what they could do to maybe turn things off or not using things that were powered. Carnworth Primary School did a full-on food waste mission. So they did things like autopsies. So they assessed exactly what food was getting wasted in the canteen. So they weighed it, measured how much was getting wasted. They also had a look at see what was commonly wasted and looked at changing their menus to try and then work out what, to not have items that were really being heavily wasted. Also looking at asking children to look at food waste at home and what they can do. And I'm trying to remember, there was another thing they did that I quite liked. Oh, yeah, little fridge raid at home. So looked at fridge and cupboard for things that were out of, and how they could reduce their food waste, looking at planning food through the week so that they reduce their food waste as well. Portion size is also a really good one to look at for food waste. So can you have smaller portions for people that maybe just want a bit less at lunchtime? Then we also have Kinmiley's Primary School, and they really focused on active travel. So they did surveys of how people were traveling to school and looked at what might be some of the barriers. They also developed some links with Sustrans to get some bikeability training, and trying to get try and encourage pupils to cycle and scoot to school where they can. Other things that you can try, because I know a lot of schools and nurseries can often be in places that it's too far for parents to not use their cars, but you can set up things like park and stride locations. So is there somewhere you can encourage parents to park that's maybe just half a mile from the school, so they're parking a little bit further away, so there's a bit less transport by car, and again health and well-being, a bit more active travel as well. Or walking buses. I know quite a few schools have had some very successful walking buses as well, which help parents to allow their children to walk to school. Or even if you can set up carpooling, where parents share lifts and things, there's lots you can do in terms of just reducing those emissions from transport. So that's kind of a whole lot of things. I know there's quite a few things there of ideas as to what you can do in terms of the climate action topic. So let's actually try and then put it into practice in terms of writing an action plan. So always think about the kind of the aim of what you're trying to do. So what would you like to change, to improve or change, and why? And that's quite a good starting point question for your pupils as well. And that helps you decide on your aims and targets. So what are you really trying to get to? And hopefully most of you are using our Eco Schools action plan template. There is the floorbook version as well, if you find that one works better for your pupils. So let's go through an example of what this might look like. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples, one on just increasing knowledge around climate change, and then another one about taking action. So maybe you identify that there's a lack of climate change or awareness in your school and setting, and you might notice that simply by questioning pupils, or you could do a little survey to ask what they know, ask how comfortable they feel with the subject. You could do that just with your eco committee or a bigger survey. So your aim would be to increase knowledge and understanding of climate change among pupils and staff. And so one of the actions might be to sign up for climate ready classrooms if you're a secondary school, or take part in the primary school one if your local authority is offering it. Another action would be to attend the Climate Action Week live lessons. And another one might be to hold an assembly on climate change. So that's not saying you have to do all of these. These are just ideas of what you could do. So yeah, you might decide you're going to hold an assembly, ask your eco committee to research the topic, and then hold an assembly and share what they've learned with the whole school. And then in terms of measuring, you could maybe repeat your survey to see if people feel more comfortable with the topic, if their understanding has improved. You could even make like a little quiz to do before and after, to see, or just generally kind of ask questions and see how the feeling is in the school as to whether that knowledge and understanding has increased. So how about taking action? So the issue overall here is that there's greenhouse gas emissions from school activities. So you might want to aim high and work towards net zero emissions for the school. Now that is a big aim, and is not going to be one that you're going to easily achieve, depending on how far down the climate action journey you are. But especially if you're starting out, that's not going to be something you're going to easily achieve within a green flag period. But it might be one that you want to set as a really long-term aim, or you might want to break it down and just actually say you want to reduce emissions from a particular area or activity. So some things you might decide to do, you might decide you're going to calculate your carbon footprint to see where you're starting, but like I say, that's not a necessity. You might decide to introduce some energy saving measures, so reducing and making sure that things are turned off when they're not being used. You might decide to plant some trees in your school grounds or your surrounding area. Or you might decide you want to actually campaign for change. So it's one that I didn't actually mention before as part of global citizenship, is thinking about asking pupils to write letters or emails or any other form of campaigning to local councillors, local MPs, asking for them to take action and to help them with their climate change goals. I say it's one of the things that we're really happy about having our the minister in for our Climate Action Week, is it gives an opportunity for people to have that direct link and that direct voice, because we find that often people feel that they do actually have quite a good influence when it comes to, you know, their teachers and their school and with their parents, but they don't feel listened to by anyone outside the environment. So actually giving you can think about doing as well. So that's just, like I say, a few examples. You might want to, maybe you want to just reduce the emissions from energy usage. Hello, can everybody hear me again now? I'm really sorry about that. I think my internet dropped out very briefly there. Now, I'm going to assume that that means that there aren't any more questions. But if anybody does want to stay on and ask any questions at the end, that's fine. I'm going to oh, oh dear. Back again. I'm really sorry. I don't know what my internet has decided to do the last few minutes. Hopefully you can hear me again. Thank you. I'm very, very sorry. I don't know why the last few minutes has decided to just give up on me. Hopefully it will keep going for the next couple of minutes. Okay, hopefully that's still working. I know you can still hear me. But thank you everybody for attending. Like I say, everything will come out, will be sent out to you tomorrow. I'm glad you found it useful. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for coming. I say I'm really sorry about these last few minutes and my internet connection. but hopefully the rest of everything of it was smooth and you've gained something from attending. So thank you very much. Thank you. Have a lovely evening, everybody.